We've stumbled around and got all the way into the 4th chapter of Genesis, if you want to catch up with us there tonight. Tonight, my sermon title is Cain's Wife. You see, Cain's wife. Well, where did Cain get a wife? Well, that's a good question, where Cain got a wife. Because, have you ever had anybody ask you that question? And I was asked that here last week at Cowboy Church several times. People came up to me and said, well, where did Cain's wife come from? And so I got to thinking about that, and this is just going to fit into it. So we're going to preach a sermon tonight on Cain's wife. So let's see if we can figure out where she came from. If you read the 17th verse, you find these words. It said, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. So the question that has come up and has been bandied around for thousands of years is, where did Cain get his wife? And there's a lot of answers. A lot of people have answered that in a lot of different ways. And the problem with that is a lot of Christians have been unable to answer that question, and we've kind of fumbled the ball and not dealt with that question adequately, and we've sort of opened the door for ridicule for our belief and our faith because God, the Bible doesn't say a thing, about God creating a woman or a wife for Cain. And so a lot of people are left. For instance, whenever you at the Scopes trial in Tennessee in 1925, none of you were there, but you remember, you've read about it. William Jennings Bryan, the prosecutor who stood for the Christian faith, he failed to answer that question about Cain's wife that was posed by Clarence Darrow, the ACLU lawyer. In recent times, there is a story about Carl Sagan. You remember Carl Sagan, the astronomer? He wrote a book called Contact. And in that, Sagan cleverly disguised that question as a way to sort of poo-poo the Christian faith and to put it down, because we didn't know where the Cain's wife came from. And he tried to make the point that the Bible is full of contradictions and can't be defeated or defended. And so he kind of opened the stage that we needed to figure out this, or Christians, we didn't have any faith to stand upon or whatever. So let me say it to you. So God only created one Adam and Eve. So Cain had to marry a sister. The only possible explanation is Cain had to marry a sister. And now that opens a lot of questions for us. We don't know, where does this work? Well, let me say to you why it had to be, why Cain had to marry a child of Adam. Because had Cain married a child that was not in the line of Adam, then the blood of Jesus would not cover any of their children, because Jesus came to die for the sins of Adam and his children. And it had to be a child of Adam or none of us, because some of us might have been in that lineage of Cain, and so we wouldn't be able to be saved. So it had to be a child of Adam. Let me read to you there what it says in Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Now, in Genesis chapter 5, verse 4, we read, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. And after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. Well, the Bible doesn't always include female children in a lineage. Whenever it's talking about the children of Adam and Abraham and Isaac, it doesn't include often the female children in that lineage, and it just kind of glosses over them. And now I want you to know, I know God doesn't think women are not important. He does. And it's just the fact that in the biblical lineage, most of the time it comes down through the male line. Now, Adam and Eve lived hundreds of years, which is ample time to have produced hundreds of children. Now think about it. If she lived 900 years, and let's say that she could have been reproductively successful halfway through her life, she could have had 450 children. pleased, you know. And so she could have had a whole passel of kids. I don't know about that. Do you have any kids? That'd be a lot of kids, wouldn't it? Where did they put them? You talk about old Mother Hubbard who lived in the shoes. She had so many children, you know. Well, but that's the case. Now, we don't know how old Cain was either at this time. And you know, we kind of get the idea that it happened the day after they got out of the Garden of Eden, you know. But hundreds of years could have passed between the Garden of Eden and the time of Cain. I mean, hundreds of years could have passed, because Cain lived a long, long, long time. I forgot exactly, but he lived 700 or 800 years. So we don't know how, but we do know this: Cain was old enough to have been a farmer. So he wasn't a kid. He had grown up, established a trade, learned how to do farming, so he would have been around a long time if he was 100 years old. But Adam and Eve could have had 75, 80 kids by the time Cain became a farmer, by the time we had this story. Well, now what about interbreeding? You know, we've always heard that that line breeding. You know, we're not to marry our close relatives. We used to. I won't go there. I'm tempted, but I'm not going to go there. The Bible does tell us in the book of Leviticus that we're not to marry our close relatives. It says it very, very clearly there in the book of Leviticus. But if you'll think about it for just a moment, why was it okay for Adam's children to intermarry early on? Well, think about this. The genetics that Adam and Eve passed on to their children were pure. Those genetics had not had time to mutate, to deform, to alter themselves. And so in that very first experience of passing on their genetics, those genetics were clean and pure. And so there wouldn't have been the interbreeding problems that you'd have today if people married who were closely related. Therefore, you'd line up the genetics in the wrong way, and you know, you'd have you'd produce deformed children. So Adam and Eve were pure from God. There was no flaws in their genetics. And so it was okay for these people to intermarry closely related people. Now, as I said, it wasn't until the time later in Leviticus when intermarriage became a problem, and God spoke to the writers of Leviticus and said to them, you know, for us not to marry close. Now, Genesis tells us how we all got started doing what we do, and it reveals the love and the protection of the Lord on Cain, the murderer. Now, I want you to get this, because we often think that Cain was marked so that he would be punished for the rest of his life. But if you read that very carefully, Cain was marked so he wouldn't be punished. That's why God put a mark on Cain, so that he would be safely protected for the rest of his life. And I want you to see tonight that that's how God, His love is revealed, in that He protected the murderer Cain and gave His love and protection to him. Now let's meet the first nomad. Let's meet the first one. Cain said to the Lord, verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." See, now, Cain thought that God's presence was only available when he was near the Garden of Eden. Now, there's a lot of, we find that a lot of times in the early time in the Bible, how the people felt like when they were, if they moved away from their homeland, they'd move away from God's presence. And the truth of it is, folks, it wouldn't matter where you moved on planet Earth, or on Mars, or on another galaxy, you can't get out of God's presence. But they didn't know that. They didn't understand how big God was, because the gods that the people in the ancient world worshipped were gods of localities, God of a mountain, God of a city, or God of a river. And so now we're introduced to the God of the heavens, and it took them a while to get that figured out. Now, Cain thought that in his wanderings that he would be killed because of what he had done and because of who he was. But I want you to know that God put a protection on him. If you read verse 15 with me, you'll see, "But the Lord said to him, not so, Cain, not so. Cain, we're not going to put a mark on you so the people kill you. Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went from the Lord's presence, and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. See, the Lord put a mark on him. Now, we don't know what that is. A lot of people have wondered about that through the years. What was Cain's mark? Did he have a X on his forehead, or what was that mark like? We don't know. It doesn't tell. The Bible doesn't tell us. But God marked him in a certain way to protect him. Now, the Lord promised to bring vengeance on anybody that hurt Cain. In other words, if anybody tries to take vengeance on Cain, God said, I'm going to bring vengeance 7 times on them. So that's the way God said that. Cain moved away from Eden, and he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And then we read that verse 17, where Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Now, I want you to notice that Cain lived under God's protection. Cain lived his life under God's protection. Now, always in these all these old Bible stories, if you just keep looking long enough, you'll find the gospel of Jesus Christ. You'll find the gospel. Now, here is where we find the gospel. Because Cain was what? He was a murderer. Cain killed his brother. Cain was judged by the Lord as a murderer and destined to wander the earth. And so he was looking around all over the earth. But he was living under God's protection. God protected Cain, even though he was a murderer. That makes me feel good. I don't know about you. That helps me to know that God loves me even though I might be a murderer or worse. That God still loves me, and even though I may have failed at a certain point, God doesn't remove His love, His grace from my life. He keeps giving it on and on and on. And I don't know about you, but I delight in that and rejoice in it. Read with me that verse as it continues in 17. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methushael, and Methushael was the father of Lamech. Now Eden failed, and now Cain goes out from Eden, and he tries to build a city. So the very first thing Cain did was he disobeyed God again. You say, well, how'd that work? What did God tell Cain he was going to be? He was going to be a wanderer. Cain, you're going to have to wander around the earth. You're going to be a nomad. You're going to have to look around everywhere. First thing Cain did when he got out of the garden was he went and built a city so he wouldn't have to wander around. See, he couldn't get over disobeying the Lord. He just couldn't stop. So he failed, and he started building this city, and he named it after his son Enoch. And then he had children. Now, our lives can be lived to bless people, or our lives can be lived to burden people. Did you realize that? We can be a blessing, or we can be a burden. It's our choice. Now, Cain and his family lived on. And Cain's family made major contributions to life on the earth. And after he had sinned and killed his brother, life went on with him and with his family. So, I guess what I need to tell you tonight is that no matter what you've done, how bad your life is or how bad you've messed it up, life goes on, and God's blessing will come on you if you'll follow Him and love Him. God doesn't quit loving us just because we sin. Now, what happened in Cain's family after he left God's presence? What happened to his family? Well, Genesis is going to tell us about this. First thing we're going to notice, we're going to meet the first cowboy. Tonight, this is a cowboy church, and we're going to meet the first cowboy tonight. First one ever was that came out of from God, and his name was, well, I'll let you figure it out here. Ada, let's keep reading verse 20. Ada gave birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. All right? So there we go. Our granddaddy for all farmers and ranchers is Jabal. He's the one, so we can blame him for that. Now, we mostly have abandoned our tents today for more permanent ranch houses, but the idea is not bad. Sometimes when our houses get crowded and our schedules get crowded, we'd like to just go camping, wouldn't we? Get out of town. So anyway, so the next time somebody asks you why you raise horses or why you raise cattle, you just tell them you got it from your granddad Jabal. All right? I'm just telling what Granddad Jabal started. That's your place, so hang on to that. Now, I'm going to preach to the band now just a moment. To all you musicians. Now, the first bluegrass gospel band players, they made their own instruments. They did. They made their first. Let's read verse 21. His brother's name was Jubal. Now get this. Jabal and Jubal. All right? So his brother, and he was the father of all who played stringed instruments and pipes. Now, if you'll, I'm going to take you down a road here to teach you a word. And it's a beautiful word because it pops out. The name Jubal is the very first of the word jubilation. Okay? Jubilation. It means joy, excitement, celebration. And so Jubal started making instruments and started playing them. And so that's why bluegrass gospel music is jubilant. That's why it is. Okay, just want you to know that. Now a pipe, it's not the kind, you stick tobacco in and, you've seen them do that. It's not that kind of pipe. It's a flute. It's like a harmonica that we use today. And so when somebody asks you where your musical talent came from, tell them you got it from Jubal, the brother of Jabal. All right, just keep that in mind. Now the first metal tool makers started working. People that learned how to mine ore from the ground and melt it and form bronze and copper and even steel. That all came, and people had to learn how to do that. And the first one that learned how to do that was in verse 22, and his name was Zillah. And Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Now, the next guy I want to introduce to you, I really think he's the first fool in the Bible. I really do. And when I explain why, I think you'll get it. I mean, this man was out of his gourd. I'll just read it and you'll know what I'm talking about. His name is Lamech. And he married 2 women at the same time. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? Yeah, what was wrong with this man? What was he thinking? Have you ever been married to a woman? One's enough. But 2? Okay. Because he married 2 women at the same time. Lamech had 2 women, and one was named Adah, and the other Zillah. And now the first thing, I think he was a fool because he married 2 women, and Adam didn't have a choice. He could only marry 1 woman because there's only 1 woman on the planet. And that's God's plan. I'm trying to be silly about this, but God's plan is for 1 man and for 1 woman to live together. And if one of them dies, then that person is free to marry again. But to have multiple wives, to be married to different, in one marriage at one time, is just a little bit too complicated, I think, for anybody, and it's against God's plan. Now, but the first reason was because he married 2 women. The second reason I think he was a fool is because he couldn't control his anger. All right, he was he must have been a passionate man. He married 2 women, and then he lost his temper and killed a man. Let's read verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. I've killed a man for wounding me, and a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. See, Lamech knew that his great-granddaddy Cain God had removed a blessing from him and had put a curse on him for killing his brother Abel. And God said that whoever kills Cain will have to pay that 7 times over, 7 times. And so God said, and so Lamech here, he killed somebody. Now who could he have killed? Think about it. He had to kill somebody of his own family, right? Because all these people were related at this time. So he killed a nephew or something that for injured him. Somebody must have hurt him some way, or somebody that wounded him, and he got mad and flared out and killed him, and it was not a good thing. Now, verse 25, Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in the place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, I have thought about that a lot this week, and have asked the Lord to help me understand that. And I think what I want to say here, and how I want to present this to you, is that always before, all the way from the Garden of Eden up until right now, Everybody believed in God. They did, because Adam and Eve walked with Him. But there was something unique happened here. I feel like that something unique and special began, and people began to announce to the world that they were followers of God, of Yahweh. I think this is the time, it may be that this is the time they've started using His name, Yahweh, Jehovah. So I'm not sure, but something unique happened here, because at this time people began to call on the name of the Lord. And it may be that this is the first time they started saying the name of I am, Jehovah, Yahweh, the Lord. But this is what we need to know. So this sermon tonight tries to teach us a lesson. And that is that we should be ready at all times to contend for our faith. People are going to ask us, where did Cain get his wife? And if we say, well, I don't know, as I've said many times, or if we say, well, he must have married somebody else outside the family, well, then we're saying the Bible is not telling us the whole story, or the Bible is lying to us, or keeping something from us. And we sort of dampen down our witness and our testimony. So we've got to be sure we understand that what God says. Now, if God said it, listen to me, I believe it. One guy said one time, if God says it, I believe it, and that settles it. And then somebody said, wait a minute, that settles it whether you believe it or not. You know, the truth is, if God says it, that's the truth. And the Bible teaches us that God made Adam and He made Eve, and He put them together, and then they produced all the people on planet Earth. So we need to be ready to hold on to our faith. Now listen to me. Invest your life in your area of giftedness. We have these different people, Jubal, Jabal, Lamech, and those others that came, and one could sing, one was a cattle rancher, far horse rancher, whatever, and they did they followed their gifts. And I think it's important to you, to me, that whenever we discover what God's done, invested in us, what passions He's given us, we need to follow it. And we need to do that with all of our life. And so invest your area there. Now, another thing I got out of this sermon tonight is that we need to love our spouses. We're to love the people close to us in our life. Not everybody's married, but you've got people who are close to you in your life. You've got children, grandchildren, neighbors, friends. And when you're to invest your life in those people close to you, and do all that you can to raise that next generation. You folks know as well as I do that it doesn't take but one generation missed with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we've lost this world for the Lord. Yeah. It doesn't take you can't skip a generation. You got to keep passing that on down. And we have done our best in America, in my generation, to not pass it on. We've done a terrible job passing out the gospel on down to our children. So let's do all that we can to teach our children to call on the name of the Lord. How do you teach your kids to call on the name of the Lord? Well, they need to watch you pray. They need to hear you lifting up their name in prayer. They need to see you bowing your head at meals. Or they need to just know that you call on the name of the Lord. So make sure you call on the name of the Lord every day of your life, and don't try to hide it. Just let your family, let your children, let your neighbors know that you love the Lord. Well, let's pray together. Lord,